We're here talking about finding an audience, and the three people with us really do know how to find an audience. They've had phenomenal success. But I wanted to ask you, you had this very big success early on, and the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of that audience. When you're seeing those zeros just clock up and clock up, is that real? How real is that when you see those numbers in terms of that sense of your audience?
This success, well, it's not immediate success. So we're starting from now. We had no idea what the numbers would be, and I went into that project really just planning on doing one season. And one of the aims for doing the season was to prove that there was an audience for diverse content. We weren't seeing those stories on Australian broadcast television at the time, and so it was an opportunity to prove that people out there want to see roles for women and want to see women with diverse sexualities, and so. Putting it out there, my secret hope that I never dared say out loud to anyone was that across the whole life of the series being online, that each episode would reach 100,000 views. And so I was working at a film school in Sydney at the time, and our colourist was one of the other lecturers, and he was definitely not our target audience. Like, he was a middle-aged guy who was into cricket and football. But he got so invested, every time I'd come into work, he'd be like, "Did you see the numbers? Did you see the numbers?" And it was kind of this thing that everyone was getting excited about seeing the numbers. And we reached that 100,000 on each episode in the first couple of months. But that was because we did a lot of work before releasing the episode, which we can talk about later. But we've recently had a big spike in our numbers, a number of views, and I'm not even really sure why. But our first episode's been online for nearly 4 years, so there was immediate success, but I think there are also moments across the series where we've seen spikes, and that's been for a number of different reasons.
But the first series clocked up, I think, a couple of million or something in the end. It was pretty... So
we actually released 3 seasons in 1 year, which gave us a lot of momentum, and I think that really helped us get views because, and it wasn't through planning, it was just how that happened, that we released 3 seasons in 2014. By the end of that year, we had 10 million views, and that then gave us the currency to go to Screen Australia and say, look what we've done. So I think it was when we released that 3rd season that it really, every time we released a new season, people went back and watched the other season, so it really then, we had a lot of momentum from that.
So Tamasin, similar sort of experience, I guess, with the Katering Show, you're self-publishing, it's on YouTube. Did you have any sense that it would be what it was in the end in terms of numbers?
We'd done one web series previously called Bleak, the web series, and I think we had maybe like 2,000 views an episode. So when we did the Katering Show, we kind of had said, we hope that each episode gets to at least 10,000, so we had lower standards than you. And then, after about a week online, we started getting hundreds of thousand views in a day. And we kind of looked into, I'm sure we'll talk about how these things happen later, but when we started getting some articles about the show on Gizmodo and Mamma Mia and a few other sites, and every time that kind of happened, and again, when it got picked up on radio shows, every time that happened, you'd see a big spike, like when these kind of conversations are happening around the show, particularly online. If it was getting talked about in an online space on an online site, then you'd get these big spikes. But it definitely exceeded our initial expectations massively. And, the same thing, you'd have someone come up to you, be like, "Oh, my auntie in England saw your show," or, "I just came across your show and my neighbour talked about your show." And it's just really great to see that it's reaching an audience and getting watched by people, because you put it out there and you want the experience of making a show, and that has its own worth, like the experience and what you learn through it. But getting people to actually watch it and get joy from it and get that kind of audience feedback is amazing.
But those numbers are just like out of the ballpark in terms of like a show on TV, for instance, would die for those kinds of numbers.
Exactly, yeah. And then obviously since then, when we made stuff in a more traditional space, and the numbers, even when it's doing well, are so much smaller than you get when you're on a global scale online, and things can really get their own life.
We'll come to that in a while, I think. So Enzo, 20 million from the tunnel, was that,
Yeah, it's a weird thing when it's happening. You're like, it's very surreal. We expected nothing like those numbers. Our main, our principal outcome in doing the project was to get something made and get ourselves noticed in some way, shape or form. We well and truly blew those expectations out of the water, but I think because the project also was in part, not in part, it was crowdfunded via a mechanism we come up with ourselves. That's really like when we put that live, and it was, not a few hours later when we were checking the numbers and seeing how many people and the response that we were getting and the traction we were getting just on that campaign was when I had that moment where I was like, oh, I think we've done a thing. And it just kind of exploded from there. But there was a lot of planning that we did ahead of that to make sure as best we could that it would get some traction. But I think that best laid plans, it's really hard to judge what's you can think something's going to go gangbusters and it just fizzles, and then you can put no planning into something and put it up on a whim and it just explodes. It's really hard to judge.
Now, I guess there can be an obsession with numbers. I guess we inherit that from broadcast television and particularly commercial TV and from box office in cinema. And the numbers, I guess, help for sure. But you're all working in an online space, in a non-traditional space, initially at least. What other kind of measures are there in terms of finding an audience that perhaps mean something else to you in terms of audience engagement when we talk about finding that audience?
Well, for me, one of the reasons for making Starting From Now, and for those, I'll just explain what it is. It's a lesbian relationship drama. It's about 4 women who live in inner city Sydney. They get drunk and they be mean to each other, so it's very much like real life. So one of the reasons for making the series was because when I was growing up, well, there was no internet, but there was no lesbian content at all that I could find, and I knew in hindsight that if there had been, it would have really had a very positive impact on me, and it would have really helped the way I saw myself. So one of the reasons for making the series was to have a show about women who happen to be lesbians and have it online, freely accessible all over the world. And so one of the things that started happening that I hadn't really expected was that we got some really heartfelt personal emails from people, and so we started seeing that we had a real community growing around the show, and we had a lot of people that were writing to us saying, thanking us for the show and saying being able to watch the show made them feel less alone, and in some instances had really helped them through some personal difficulties. So that for me, 110 million views is great, and I'll keep saying that number over and over again. But getting an email from someone saying that it changed their life, that's worth that number of views.
So beneath those impressive numbers, there's a deeper audience relationship, which you perhaps wouldn't see in a traditional model.
Yeah, that's right, because it's immediate, because you get immediate feedback, which can be good and bad. You get immediate feedback and you can engage with the audience very readily. So as I said, we started to see that there was a community building. Some of our fans became friends with each other, and when we released our final episode, because we made 5 seasons over 3 years, when we released our final episode, some of our fans made us a video to say thank you, which was very sweet. But one of the things that we did notice too is because it's so immediate and because people are watching it on their phones and it's very intimate, our actors were getting emails from people, from some people that were, asking them for advice that they weren't trained to give. So we made sure that we also started getting some resources together and, pointing people in the right direction if they needed help that we weren't qualified to give them.
So, and the Katering Show, the first time I know I'm conscious of seeing it was my wife was laughing at something and said, "You've got to come and see this thing." And I can remember very clearly the first time I saw them, and I think that was probably the journey for a lot of people to the show.
Yeah, it was really great. I think a lot of people kind of took ownership on kind of like finding it and sharing. Like people got really excited about sharing it with people, and exactly, pulling people over and being, "Have you seen this thing?" or sending it to people. So it built up a really amazing community online as well. And yeah, our fans are really great. They're always on social media and also comments on YouTube and things. For example, for Series 2, because we made it with the ABC, inevitably some people on YouTube are very used to just getting all their content for free and not having to think about the people making it having to eat. And so we got a lot of people saying that we'd sold out by going to a network and things, and our fans would go in and like defend us. Like, it's very cute. Like, we don't even have to get involved. If anyone's ever like, oh, why are you doing this? Then someone will come and be like, don't you know, like, they have to pay rent and they have children and they, you know, if you want them to keep making things, this is the reality. So they're very passionate, and I feel like they really liked being able to make jokes themselves and getting involved in jokes, and it's a really beautiful thing. And we got lots of emails from people saying they really like the show, and yeah, it's very exciting, as well as the numbers. It's that kind of like seeing the comments and the shares and the conversations around it. It's just a really lovely thing that people get so excited about it.
Sure. And for you, Enzo, with the tunnel, I mean, you know, you're very actively engaged with that audience from the get-go in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's something consistent here, even just hearing Tamasin and Julie speak about their experiences, is that, especially when you're putting out something that is free, or it at some point is free, the numbers that the analysis of that's interesting to note is how those numbers go from view count down to the engagement, the actual engagement at the other end, because as far as I've been able to tell from my experience, those numbers are pretty consistent, right? So if you have X number of 1,000 people on an email mailing list, then you know that you're probably going to get about 30%, 20 to 30% of those are even going to get opened, and you know, a certain percentage of that are going to get a click through or whatever. So the importance of the viewer numbers, I think if you're talking about trying to directly access people, it's how those numbers filter down. The bigger that number, the bigger you end up with at the other end, if that makes sense. So that was very true for us, I think. You know, we had that sort of steady sort of, I don't know what you'd call it if you plotted it on a graph, but it was consistent with that. And that just helps you make better decisions on if you're going to try and monetize something in any way and turn it into, you know, if you're going to do a physical product or like a DVD or try and sell a stream, you just know that the engagement, you're not going to get 100 million people buying something if you're going to try and sell it. That's just not how it works, you know. And so I think there's an importance there. And also our version of that sort of, you know, people jumping to defense and stuff, I think, because we made a film that was a found footage / documentary style film, we were getting a lot of people, and I still do, getting people contacting us thinking it's actually real. And I don't, like, the filmmaker in you just wants to take credit for that and go, ha, yeah, nailed it. But I don't know, like, it's really odd to think that I had people contacting me trying to reach Natasha Warner, who's the journalist in the film played by Belle Delia. Like, it's not like we don't have credits on the film, right? So, but these people bought it, hook, line and sinker. There's writer credits, director credits, actor credits, and there's still, you know, it's, anyway, that was our version of the engagement. People thought it was real, which was weird.
But you talked about some of those metrics that you can analyse. I mean, I was going to ask you all how important is as a producer now to be able to understand and be able to really work with the metrics that are out there now in terms of, you know, that's often after the event, of course, there's a whole planning that goes in advance, but once the work's out there in the world, to understand that system and to be able to, I don't mean exploit in a cynical way, but to work with it for the show's benefit. How important is that now as a producer?
I might just jump in on that. I think it's very important, and I think that, because one of the things that we noticed going back on subsequent projects and trying to reach that audience again was that when we went back with any news or any updates or any feedback that wasn't related to the tunnel, the engagement dropped right off. Like, they just did not, even though the demographics of that kind of content should overlap, we just didn't get the same kind of reaction from those people when we brought them a sci-fi project, for example, or something that was a more sort of thriller-based project. So that was a big learning curve for us and a big takeaway that when you're working to an online audience, I think niches are really important to consider. And so, you just go with trial and error, man. Like, the more you do things, the more you get a feel for what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's one of the best things about, I mean, you also get metrics on a network and things as well when you get reports from them, but online you can immediately see what isn't working. Like, it's kind of it's also, I feel like a new frontier, and there's no right and wrong answers. Like, I've had discussions with people, they're like 100% you should definitely, like, for example, put all your episodes out at once so that when people watch the first one, they can watch all the way through to maximise your views, which makes sense. And then you've got other people who have said you should definitely do it week by week because that's the only way that you can build subscribers over time, or else you'll never be able to do it. And both completely make sense. Like, there's no right and wrong answers for 90% of the things in the space. But online, because you have access to the metrics, you just try things and then you learn when they don't work that you shouldn't do that again, and you learn when it does work that you can try it again in another way maybe and keep trying to, like, expand on that. And it's it's definitely a constant learning curve. And because you can access all that back-end information in social media and on the viewing platforms, you can constantly be kind of learning and tweaking and trying to figure out the best way to reach your audience.
Yeah, it was helpful for us because we did 5 seasons, so we could see what was working and what wasn't, and what people were responding to. And I agree, it's trial and error, and it's a new frontier, and no one really knows. I don't think anyone really knows in television or film anyway, It's just, you've just got to try things and do things you believe in. So, so we were able to really look at what was working and what wasn't across, especially across that first year. And then we were able to use that information. And the same with social media. Like, we learnt very quickly that the audience didn't want to know about me. They wanted to know about the 4 good-looking women we had in our cast. So we exploited that.
Now, you touched on diversity, Julie. How important has that been? I mean, all this work has been not through traditional pathways. It's been online. To what extent is that ability to speak to audiences that are perhaps underrepresented, whether it's perhaps a niche audience, as you mentioned, Enzo, or audience that have been basically underrepresented? How much is that a driver for finding those new audiences?
I think it's essential. I think online is where we're seeing that diversity. Starting from now would never have been commissioned for Australian television, and it was quite gratifying that we actually sold it to television for our last 2 seasons. But when we were first making it in 2013, there was no way it would have been on television. And we were actually one of the first female shows, yours was probably as well, to be funded through a Screen Australia multi-platform. And I think we were one of the first dramas. So there wasn't a lot of diversity. And you see in the online space, it's an opportunity for people to tell those stories that aren't being funded and that aren't being commissioned. And the audience wants it. Like, we found very quickly that there's an audience that's hungry for it, and the fact that people are still watching our show, even though it doesn't really stand up to things that are being made now, people are still watching it because the content's not out there, and there's an underserviced audience who's hungry for things that they're sick of seeing the same thing, and online is a way for people to get stories out there, and the audience keeps growing for that very reason.
Tamasin?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the online space, it's kind of twofold. One, it's hard to get past the gatekeepers when you have a project or talent that they don't immediately see as being worthwhile because they're not familiar with them or they haven't been proven. And so in the online space, then you get to kind of revert that and prove that it'll work, and then they will talk to you and give you the opportunities. And 2, when you have, definitely from looking at other projects as well, when you have an audience that's underrepresented in traditional media, they're searching for it online and they're trying to find those stories. And it's like, that's if you can figure out exactly who they are and where to find them, that's going to make your project so much more successful because they're wanting your content and you're wanting them to watch it. You just have to figure out where that meeting place is in the online space.
And you're working in an area of the industry where there are all those perceptions about female comedians and
exactly.
so you're fighting against all those prejudices.
Yeah,
and I'm
exactly.
conscious that Channel 10's had its big debacle recently
I
with
know.
its pilot week and not having any women.
How did no one say anything about that before they did that? So stupid. Exactly. So yes. So I mean, when we did the web series Bleak, we did that to kind of get the attention of networks because we're having trouble getting it up, and the same with Katering. We wanted to do something where we didn't have to be beholden to a network, and we could kind of prove ourselves in our own way and control a project. And it's a really gratifying thing. And I think that's another thing on the numbers front, that you don't necessarily need millions of views to do that. Like if you make it and you can prove the kind of quality of your project, it doesn't need to have millions of views to work as a proof of concept to be able to then go back to networks or whatever platform it is and show them that you can make the quality work and that it's possible that it can be made into a bigger project, whether or not, so you don't need to have the millions of views online. It can be used as a proving space for your project regardless.
And so, Enzo, I mean, it's not diversity so much for you, but it's very much working in niche areas. And you said you've already got burnt a little bit by audiences being very particular.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, if we're talking about the tunnel specifically, I think the shrewd move that we made in terms of trying to access a particular niche or a large audience was, at the time, there was a lot of talk and a lot of buzz around issues revolving around piracy of content in the digital media and online. And so we made the choice to release the film for free on BitTorrent, because BitTorrent itself is a perfectly legitimate piece of software and a perfectly legitimate decentralized system, which is actually really, really good at doing what it does, which is moving enormous chunks of data around really quickly and efficiently. It just so happens that the majority of the use at the time of that platform was to pirate films and music. So, but I think, by accessing that audience, we had a lot of, I guess we kind of turned a lot of those people into evangelists, because we took down the barrier to access. We just sort of went, well, you can't pirate our movie because we're giving it to you for free. So do with it as you please. And that, I think that helped hugely in the take-up, and that's a whole underground community. Because I think the conversation that I've always had around that sort of piracy issue is that the only way to get rid of it is to just make it redundant. If people don't need to do it, they won't. And then that will leave you with this many people that will still do it because they just will do it anyway, and you're not going to be able to do much about those people. And that's been proven by, I think, the advent of Netflix as a streaming platform, because the statistics when we were releasing The Tunnel was something like 70, or I can't forget the exact numbers, but the vast majority of internet traffic in North America was BitTorrent. And now it's Netflix, right? It's just piracy has fallen right off because people don't need to do it anymore because it's at the click of a button. So...
to address the title of the discussion today, like head on, is it possible to sort of sum up a few key tips and tricks that influence your ability to find an audience?
Hard work is primary. So, I mean, clearly we have a niche audience. Our audience is lesbians and 14-year-old boys, so that's our niche audience. And so we knew the smartest thing to do was to target that niche. And so I spent a couple of months before releasing an episode really reaching out to people who were speaking to our audience. So knowing who our audience is, where they're watching things and how to reach them. And so I built partnerships with other lesbian websites and blogs and YouTube channels, offered them exclusive content, made them feel special, tried to get them excited about the show so that when we released an episode, their audience would be waiting for it. So we got them excited, they got their audience excited. So there were people that were waiting for it before we released an episode. And so it made sense to kind of build that up before we... I think some people think that if they put something out there, if it's good, people will find it. They're not going to find it. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute, and you're competing with cat videos and really high-end shows as well. So you've got to do the work. You've got to know who your audience is, and then you've got to put in the work to let them know that your show is coming and that it's going to be good, and they should be excited.
And Julie? Tamasin?
So it's interesting because in a way, I mean, I think it's different because I feel like you have such kind of a niche audience that you were making content for that wasn't represented at all. So we did try and go to kind of like publications and things before our first series of Katering Show was released, and like nobody wanted to talk to us, or like if they posted anything about it, it was just like a tiny bit from our press release, and that was it, and like no engagement whatsoever. And everyone's like, a web series, like why would we care about a web series? This means nothing to us. And then it was only after we put it out that suddenly people wanted to talk to us. So it was kind of, in our case, I think it depends who your audience is. It's almost like unless there is there's an audience really looking for it, or you have like someone in it who's a bit of a name, or you have some kind of hook that'll tie it into something, then there was kind of a worth to us doing our biggest kind of push once it existed, so that when we were on a radio show, people could go immediately and watch it, or if they read it in an article, they could go immediately and watch it, because as a web series, it didn't really hold much interest for people, we found. So they weren't going to remember in a week to go look for this web series that they read an article ago about a week ago, which had people in it that they'd never heard of. Why would they do that? So we started off kind of doing a bit of a press in the lead up, and then kind of clicked and went, why are we doing this? Because no one's really showing that much interest. Let's wait until it's actually out and then do the push, which we did. But again, at the beginning, no one really wanted to know that much about it. And then it was kind of like after a week, people started talking about it, and then suddenly we got way more press and got like a front page in like The Age, Lifestyle, and like on like Nova and all the radio shows and things like that off the back. So our biggest push kind of came once it was up and people had something that they could watch and understand the show. So that was our experience. And also I think something you should have a good understanding of kind of the platform you're putting it on and the audience that you're going for. What are the platforms that they would be hanging out on? Because obviously each platform has a slightly different demographic and a different way of viewing, and things have changed a lot from when we put our show out. So when we put our show out, there was no Facebook video and things. It was just YouTube. But our biggest audience was actually probably, like the way it spread was on Facebook, when people were sharing the YouTube videos on Facebook. Wouldn't work anymore because the Facebook algorithm will squash a YouTube video, whereas it'll push a Facebook video. So if that's where you're mainly going to find your audience, maybe you should be releasing it on Facebook. So doing that kind of research into thinking about which platforms, and there's no reason you can't release it on more than one, although, again, some people would argue to do it on one so that your video trends. For example, on YouTube, if you start to trend, then the algorithm will be pushing it up, so more people have it come up in their video and you'll be on like the front page of YouTube. So when we were releasing, we just did YouTube, partly because the others didn't exist, but so that we were pushing all our audience to there so it would trend. So there is a logic in that way of releasing it on one maybe to start, but then after that you could spread it onto different platforms and again experiment and see which ones work best for your audience. But that's definitely, as well as the research into where to find them, thinking about where you're hosting it, if it's an online project, is also really important.
Yeah, and I think what I hear as the through line here is probably the first thing that I would have said as well, which is try and find where your audience is already looking. Don't try and turn their gaze to where you are. Find where they're already looking and then put your stuff in front of them. It's a general principle, because as an example, I've done a lot of work with a Queensland company called Food Matters. We've made a couple of documentaries and are about to release a new 5-part series. And they are, generally speaking, talking head interview-based documentary projects. Those interviewees are chosen very, very carefully, not just for, how they are on camera and their level of expertise, but all of them have their own community in their own right. So as well as the Food Matters, subscriber base and mailing list that they have, which numbers, whatever it numbers, I'm not sure what those numbers are, but then you have a dozen people who are appearing in a documentary who are going to want to promote that to their audience that they're appearing in that documentary. And if each one of those has 500,000, 1 million, several million subscribers, to access as well, then suddenly just by casting, quote unquote, correctly, you've created a huge amount of noise that's going to happen leading up to and at release time, and all people that are going to be interested in the kind of content you're trying to get across to them. So again, finding where they're already living and bringing it to them rather than trying to, do what I guess is the traditional, almost the theatrical marketing campaign stuff, which is just kind of like just shout really, really loud and hope that out of the 100 people that you reach, most of them will be interested. That kind of, it's the inverse, I think, when you're talking online and trying to find an audience.
Now, you've all, in a sense, started in a self-publishing sort of way, had amazing success as we've discussed, but you've all then moved on to work with, broadcasters and in more traditional platforms as well. How does that affect finding your audience when you're doing projects in that more traditional way, when you've come from a self-publishing way and done it so well? You've mentioned already, Tamasin, you lost your numbers for starters. You got paid, but you didn't get as big an audience in a sense.
Yeah, well, it's first of all, obviously the first series of Katering Show we just did entirely ourselves on YouTube. Everyone could watch it all at the same time. The second series we did with the ABC, which meant there was a licensing period where it couldn't go on YouTube for Australians, and we had all our international fans, because of course they follow you on social media, so you're talking to your Australian fans about it being on ABC, and all the international fans are being like, why can't we watch it? They were also like asking each other how to get IPNs, which was really funny because it was Americans being like, so how do we get a fake IPN so we can watch an Australian show? And it's like, great, this is hilarious, because usually it's the other way.
Yeah.
So that was nice. But also then, they were just really eager, and we thought, the only way, because we didn't have access to geo-blocking on YouTube because we didn't have a big enough audience, or whatever it was on YouTube, to get that access. We tried putting the smallest license fee possible for Series 2 so that people international could watch it, but we could block it from Australia. That was the only way we could figure it out. And YouTube fans, so many of them were so angry at us for why are you charging me 20 cents to watch this episode? This is a disgrace. And it's we don't even want to charge you 20 cents, but because of the licensing that comes when you get proper funding, sometimes you've got to do licensing deals for different regions. Yeah, we had to work around that, so that was an experiment that didn't work, but learned from that. And then obviously we went to get Krackin, where we originally had an American platform that shut down while we were shooting. So then it didn't get released in America when it originally was going to, and it was just in Australia. And again, international fans that were kind of following us from Katering to our TV show were like, why can't we watch it? And it's very freeing when you're putting something online, free for everyone to watch, and you get all these numbers and nice chat. And then when you move into the world of getting commissioned and dealing with licensing, it's great because you get to make bigger projects and engage more people and make these amazing things. But yes, it complicates the audience engagement side. It adds different barriers that you have to work your way through and learn about. So it's been an experience. And definitely when you're looking at, on ABC, you have quite good numbers, but when it compares to on YouTube, when the whole world can watch it, they seem much smaller. Just a smaller pool of people to choose from.
But also in the sense that, with the ABC, they've got a whole publicity unit and a team, and the kind of hard work that Julie was talking about in terms of the time you put in, the effort you put into building and finding those partnerships and an audience. You've got the ABC saying, here's our publicity team. I mean, you're working with them, but you work sort of around and sort of outside them as well? Or?
Yeah, so we kind of have a bit of a combination because we had an established audience and our own social media going and all that kind of thing going for us already. We did kind of continue that in our way, which is, I think, an unusual way for the ABC to work. They're used to running that side, but we were like, no, leave this stuff to us in our voice. Because I think even normally you wouldn't have your own website and your own Facebook. Normally you have to go through the ABC. But because we had all that established, it was a thing we were like, no, we know our audience. We want to be able to talk to them directly in our own voice and control that along with our show. So we were given the opportunity to do that because we kind of had a proven record in that space, but in collaboration with the ABC's team as well, who have a slightly different angle on your publicity because they're speaking to their audience. which isn't necessarily completely normally aligned, which is part of the reason that, you know, they come to people who have success online because they want you to bring your audience with you onto the traditional platform. So it's that kind of give and take.
Only then to tell them that they can't watch your show.
And then you have to tell them you can't watch your show. It's so complicated.
Yeah.
But,
So Julie, as well, so you're developing more series now, again with the ABC. You did a short film with the ABC. What's your experience been?
It's quite interesting because, so I went from Starting From Now, which is an adult drama, to a children's television episode, which isn't the same audience. And it wasn't actually something that I thought I would ever do, that I'd work in children's television. You know, because if they can't drink and have sex, what are they going to do? So it's been interesting because I'm used to controlling all of that. I'm used to controlling having a website and controlling the social media and building the numbers. And I can't do that with this because the ABC does control that. We don't have a website. We can't have social media for the show. And so I've actually found it quite, you know, a new experience, but also quite frustrating because I am used to having control of all of that. And seeing opportunities that I think, oh, we should be pushing ourselves forward that way, and it doesn't necessarily happen. So, yeah, so that was a one-off episode that screened for the International Day of the Girl this time last year, and it's now going to series. So when the series comes out, you know, we might try and negotiate having a website and doing some of that stuff. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But we had a similar experience with Starting From Now when we sold to SBS, and we geo-blocked Australia. But the message was very confusing because it was like, if you're in Australia, you can watch it on SBS on this night, but if you're not, you can do this and do that. And I think, and it took us a long time to get those numbers back because people were confused. And I think if it's online, it needs to be simple. You need to be really clear about what you're doing and how to reach people, because we took a long time to get back from that.
And Enzo, last comment, and then we'll go to the floor.
Yeah, I was just going to say the thing that, again, the through line that I see through all these conversations is the retention of that audience that you're finding. Like, you do all this work in terms of trying to find somebody. I think, and we're all guilty of it, I think, of not putting enough effort into working out how to keep them. It's not just about a click on a video or a Facebook like. I think you need to find something. I'm still trying to find my way through it myself in terms of going, how can I find something so that I'm not starting from scratch with every single project? It's such a steep hill to climb. How do we find our way through that? I'm still working that out. It's a tricky one. It's definitely a tricky one.
And as Tamasin mentioned, there's, you know, the whole industry changes every sort of 12 months, 18 months now. I mean, you've got Facebook Watch and Instagram TV now, and you know, a plethora of new things. So, all right, thank you all very much. We'll go to the audience. If there's anyone who has a question, please put your hand up, and we will ask you to project. Yes.
Enzo, I was just really curious when you were talking about that kind of underground community that you found and releasing the film online as well, and how I guess you still had loyal followers that still wanted to engage with your work. Is that true?
So I'll just repeat this for the online audience. There's sort of a question about working with a sort of an underground audience and keeping that connection. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, we got a lot of support from the, I guess, the BitTorrent community, right? So probably a lot of those people were downloading stuff illegally, if you dig behind why a lot of those people do that, there is actually kind of a logic behind it. I don't necessarily agree or not agree with it. It's just that they feel like they're being ripped off somewhere on some level. So we felt like we'd found a way to give them what they wanted, while trying to make a point about distribution and trying to make a point about communities, the principles of the internet, blah, 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 blah. It's all up online if you want to go and look for it. It's somewhere, someone will be having a rant about it. But yes, they did help push it. They helped us push our crowdfunding campaign because we had already made that promise to them. They helped us push the release of the film when it came out. I mean, I remember coming out of the premiere screening here in Sydney, which was a nice full cinema, and the torrent file was set to go live at the same time as our Sydney premiere. And we came out of that and there were thousands of views already by the time the film had played once to a crowd of like 400 people or whatever it was. So definitely evangelists there. The interesting part about that though is the evidence in terms of who those people was that when we did try to, I guess, collect emails and capture emails so that we could keep talking to them in a meaningful way that went beyond a Facebook or something like that, there were some people were talking about, there were comments about from some people thinking it was a trap. It was like, well, they'll get my email address and then they'll know that I'm pirating stuff and then they're going to come and get me. And I'm like, man, you think way too much of us. We just want you to see this thing that we made. So it's been interesting, but I think that if, for example, if we ever decided to go back and do a crowdfunding campaign for a Tunnel sequel, I think we would get a pretty strong reaction from the people that we can communicate with directly. But I don't know how they would react if we didn't give it back to them for free after we'd made it. So that's a question mark for me, and I just don't know what the answer is. So.
Any other questions? Yes.
So the overarching question is, do the metrics affect your storytelling? Specifically, Julie, you said that it became popular and then you were talking with people before the 4th and 5th season started. How did that affect things? And with you guys, you did one product which is its own brand almost, and then got burnt by trying to move to something different. Does that affect the projects that you take in the future?
So the question again is, do the metrics basically affect the storytelling and influence how you approach the stories?
It did actually. I changed the ending of the series, which is something that I never thought I would do. So originally it was supposed to be one season, and so then we finished that first season. The day after was like, that was good, let's do another one. So then I wrote the second season, again, expecting it to be the last, and then we did a third, and so finally it was like, we have to work out what we're doing here. And so we'd had 3 seasons. The audience was really engaged with one of the couples, and that wasn't the couple that I expected would end up together at the end. But because they were so invested in this couple, and it's because the 2 actors that were playing those characters had a real spark off screen. Like, they were just great friends and they had this real charisma, and people were really getting that when they were watching it. And so they were really invested in this one couple. And so when it came to writing the 4th and 5th season, I changed the ending so that couple ended up together, because it made sense to me. I mean, you've got this immediate feedback from the audience. You'd be stupid not to listen to it. And like a lot of people say, I don't like to read the comments. For me, as a writer-director, to read the comments is gold, because I'm getting immediate feedback on something that I'm creating. And so I changed the ending, and, you know, some people say, do you feel like you were selling out? But, I mean, I didn't make them heterosexual, so that would have been selling out. But I felt like just changing the couple that ended up together, it ended up making sense story-wise. And so, you know, I sleep easy at night.
So I think in terms of the idea of, because the numbers are less now that we're in a traditional space, I feel like it's... Get Krackin, I'm really proud of the show, and we've got to do some amazing things with it. And I know we talked about diversity before, but I'll just say as well, with the Katering Show, it was quite small. It was just 2 casts. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to kind of explore the different diversity in the stories. Whereas with Get Krackin, for example, we've done a few different things that we've got to explore in a longer show. But one of the things is now we have explore a lot more storylines to do with diverse characters and issues that we care about and all that kind of thing that you couldn't necessarily do in just a 10-minute cooking show. So we've got those opportunities. So that's been really great. But I definitely think that I would like to, in the future, do another project that lives in the online space and kind of go back and explore that world again, because it is such a great space in terms of getting feedback and connecting with audience and being able to reach lots of different people in a way that traditional media just can't quite do at the moment. But traditional media also has its own amazing benefits, and I also want to work in that as well. So I guess in terms of metrics, it's kind of just given me a passion to explore both spaces more and see the kind of different storytelling and engaging with audiences. And also with the traditional media side, definitely we do it with Get Krackin, and I think I'll always do it with future projects, is just that audience engagement around the show. Like, you can't do it in the same way, it doesn't live online, but in terms of like the constant engagement through social media and those kind of things, and how important kind of the digital extensions, like the little bits of the story that you can give the audience to enjoy outside of the actual show. That kind of world I'll definitely always continue to do on all my projects. It's such, it's just such an exciting kind of aspect that the internet gives us, those kind of living outside the actual story itself.
It's a really good question. I've been trying to think of what my answer is, and I don't think you gave me enough time. I can't recall a time where we made any drastic changes because of any immediate feedback, but certainly if you are creating a project and it doesn't work, you need to think very, very carefully about not doing that again, right? So on that level, yes, I think so, but also because I think that if you're crafting a story for a film or a series that's a very cynically devised ploy at targeting a very particular audience, I don't think that tends to work. I think that's kind of a recipe for failure. And also, there's always going to be haters, right? So it's really about, are there more people that like what you're doing than people that don't? And then, you know, is it working and paying off on a sort of audience and in an audience and financial sense? Because if the answer is yes, then I guess that's working. You know, it's tricky. Like I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, absolutely, but I think I would be very cautious to change too much on the fly just because a piece of feedback came back that we should be doing a particular thing. And I'm like, cool, I get you enjoy watching what we're making, but we're making it, so let us do what we think. I would be probably more inclined to take the gamble on what we felt was right for the project first and foremost. And that may align with, you know, what's right for the audience, or what the audience is asking for, I should say. Not what's right for you. We don't want to ignore the audience.
Any other questions? Oh, sit down.
I guess when you're working online, a lot of finding your audience relies on your audience, so that, you know, them sharing amongst their peers and like-minded networks. So how much do you think about that kind of psychology of what people share online when you're creating your social media assets, or when you're thinking about what your kind of strategy is? How much do you think about what people like to share when you're kind of thinking about your marketing strategy?
So the question there again was, how much do you think about what people can share and want to share when you're building that strategy around the release?
It was interesting for us because when we started making Starting From Now, everyone was saying drama won't work online. You know, only comedy will work because they're standalone episodes and you can share them, and, you know, what people share, it tells, you know, people who they are and that sort of thing. And so everyone was saying drama's not going to work online, which I think is why we were one of the first dramas funded through multi-platform. I mean, obviously Netflix, later, drama does work online. But it was interesting because you can't share our episodes because they are, it is a series. And so what we tried to do was to make our social media shareable, and again, through trial and error and learning on the fly, making sure that each post had, you know, a picture of one of our good-looking cast, you know, had a question with it so that people could tag their friends, and so it spread that way. We soon learnt what it was that they were responding to, and it was primarily around the cast, and it was primarily around, you know, their characters and how they engage with each other.
Definitely. So obviously the Katering Show was standalone episodes, and it was a comedy. So that's why it was very shareable content from the start. But certainly even around that, the other content we're kind of creating on social media, and certainly with Get Krackin, because unfortunately iView you can't like embed and share, which was a frustrating time when we realised that. So pulling out clips and sharing them, and making little memes and things like that, and you kind of get the sense of which kind of characters, for example, Helen Badu, kind of like capture the audience's imagination, and the kind of thing that they'll then tag their friend in and be like, this is that thing I was telling you about. And constantly, looking at the back end of the metrics and seeing what's working in that way, so you can figure out, because it's the sharing is the thing that, and also then it's like the audience kind of taking ownership when they're sharing it. It's like, look at this thing I found, or look at this thing I'm tagging you in that I thought you would like. It's really like one-on-one rather than someone on the outside trying to sell them something. And that's kind of how the project will spread, for sure.
I think for the kind of content that I tend to make, I try and think of that shareability more as word of mouth rather than sharing the actual content, because it's tricky to get somebody to sit down and watch an hour and a half on Facebook, and when you are doing short form episodic stuff that doesn't necessarily stand alone, that's also tricky to share. So I think the trick is to go one step above any single piece of content and try and get people sharing the way that they would share a trailer or a review or something for something that's on TV or theatrical, right? So yes, that means creating additional pieces of content. For us, we do a lot of behind the scenes stuff, which, has interest. It's the equivalent of, in some ways, the extras on a DVD, right? But now everybody gets access to those extras, and they're shareable, and you're creating a word of mouth and an awareness around the project rather than people specifically sharing the project itself. So in that case, yes, we think about what makes something shareable, but not necessarily for the actual piece of content for the scripted stuff that we're making. It's the satellite content. We just go, what are people going to be watching? How long should it go for? What are they interested in? And who are we trying to pitch it to try and create something that will be shareable?
And actually, I wanted to say as well, like the thing about all these extras we're talking about and running these social media accounts, just be aware it's like the equivalent of making the project all over again, but it never ends.
Every day.
It's like forever and constantly making new content all the time. Like, it's a lot of work. The amount of things that have to exist around the actual project to engage your audience is a huge amount of work. And when you're kind of, off your own back, making your own project with no money and doing all that yourself, it's you doing that every day. So it's just also have a think. And so also I think as part of that, thinking about shareable content, have a think about what's something that you could make that's quite easy, like that hits the thing that your audience is looking for and is shareable, but is easy to make. For example, for Katering Show, we did like cooking tips. So it was like a stock image and a one-line joke about a cooking tip, and we could make like heaps of them and share them easily, or or it's like a still a cast member with a question about their lives, and you can do lots of them quite easily because it's very, very time-consuming to be making that kind of thing all the time.
Did you schedule any time on set to capture anything that was specifically for that purpose that wasn't part of the show?
Yeah. So we shoot little clips and make things that are extras throughout the making of our show, for sure. And then because to have that kind of pool of extras that you can then slowly divvy out around the show in the lead up or afterwards to keep the interest up is really important.
Thank you. I think there was one question behind Sue.
Thank you. I just wanted to generally ask you about when you're, expressing who your target audience is. A lot of what I'm hearing, and Julie expressed this before, you can go quite niche. You can get away with saying my target audience is this, very narrow. How do you, could you sort of elaborate on how that works when you've got stakeholders involved? Perhaps you're looking at funding and you're looking at trying to convince other people that this is going to work with this little niche audience. How niche can you go? More or less is what I'm saying.
So the question was, how niche can you go with a targeted audience, I suppose, particularly when there are others in the production process, funders and other people who may have a stake in the project as well?
As niche, I can go as niche as you can because it's a global audience. So that niche is deep. Like, it's not just, a niche audience in Sydney or Brisbane. It's like, it's a global audience. And I think, traditional broadcasters are stuck in their ways quite a bit, but I actually think people are starting to understand niche. And I think they're starting to understand that niche works really well online. And so people are always saying, who's your audience? And when you apply for Screen Australia funding or state funding, they want to know who your audience is and what's your pathway to audience, how do you access that audience. So audience is becoming a huge a huge component of getting funding. So when you've got those other interested parties, I think they want you to know who your audience is, and they want you to be as specific about it as you can, because it is a global, deep niche, and that brings in numbers. I think if it's too broad, you don't know how to find them.
And I think as well, so you're, on one hand, you're saying my audience is this very specific group, but on the other hand, you're also, I guess, as part of that saying, and look how no one else is catering to them. And look at this other thing that was for this very tiny niche audience and how well that did, because they're so desperate for content. Like, it's kind of like you're saying it's this small group, but then you're kind of backing it up with like surrounding information to show how you're the only one who's going to cater to them, and the only other person who did something slightly similar, look how much success they had, and that kind of like information. But yeah, but they want to know that you know how to meet your audience. And in a way, the fact that they're really niche is a huge advantage, because you're going to be going out there and you're also not going to be drowned by a million other people trying to reach them as well, because you're filling a gap in the market.
But you're right in saying that the tension is definitely there when you've got stakeholders who want that sort of security, and you're trying to. So, yeah, like, you know, and we've had that. You guys both mentioned the friction between having the publicity department of a broadcaster versus your own communication directly to an audience. I think they're getting better at that, but it's still, you know, it's why would you bring somebody on for the specific thing that then you're not going to let them do? It doesn't. You know, so otherwise I completely concur with everything that you ladies have said.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there might be time for one very, very quick question, if there is one last quick one. Yes?
Oh, with the ones that I was saying were the easy to share content. They weren't even films. They were just like, you mean the easy to share thing I said? It was a stock photo and like one line of a joke. And that was just like a thing that we could put out once a week that didn't take a lot of our time away from actually making the show. And so we're doing it again for Get Krackin at the moment. We're trying to like prepare a bunch of posts that are based on what the kind of things real morning shows would share, which are ridiculous anyway. So in a way, we're just kind of ripping them off, but slightly changing the topics. And then we can share that amongst, in the lead up to our show going out, when suddenly we'll have a lot more clips and things to share, we can kind of share that easy jokes, basically. Like enough that people kind of, our audience really like engaging with jokes and making their own jokes back. People get right behind like wordplay and stuff. It's very exciting. So yeah, so that kind of, just trying to think of something that's easy for you to make a lot of, that is still going to hit the note that it needs to give people who are following your social media regular content.
Thanks very much. Now, just before we close, perhaps we'll do some helping to find the next audience for the next project. So, Julie, what's next and what can we look out for? It's the series next year, is it?
Yeah, so we're in development on first day of the series, and so ideally we'll be shooting that next year. It's a children's television series, but the content, I think, so I don't know if you might not have seen the episode. It's about a 12-year-old transgender girl who starts high school. So it's a children's television series, but our audience was quite broad, so it feels like something that, you know, a family can sit down and watch together. And yeah, I've got a couple of other projects in the works as well.
First day on the ABC. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Get Krackin season 2?
Yeah, so series 2 will come out early next year. Series 1 will go back up over the summer if anyone hasn't seen the first series yet. And then, yeah, series 2, Jan, Feb kind of timing. Keep an eye out. It's good. We're pushing the envelope even more this time. So looking forward to some angry emails.
Enzo?
We'll have Skinford Chapter 2 hitting cinemas at the end of November in cities around Australia, including Brisbane. I think it's going to be screening at New Farm. And if you don't know what Skinford is, you can see Skinford 1 at deadhouse.tv, along with a whole bunch of other cool stuff that hopefully you might like. If you're into genre stuff, it's not warm and fuzzy.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for coming and sharing your insights on finding an audience. Good luck with your next audiences, but thanks very much for coming.